There is an implement lot on the edge of Charles City, Iowa, where the concrete still holds the shape of a loading dock nobody has used since the Carter administration. Weeds have come up through the seams. A grain elevator a quarter-mile east still casts its shadow across the lot every afternoon, the way it has for 100 years. But the building it used to shadow, long, low brick with sawtooth skylights, sits mostly empty now. The paint that came out of that building for half a century was a particular shade of green, somewhere between new corn leaves and the underside of a willow, and farmers in 3 states called it meadow green without needing to be told the name. The company that mixed that paint stopped being a company you could call by its own name in 1960. It took 22 more years for the name itself to disappear from a tractor hood. Both things happened here, or because of decisions made about here, and almost nobody who lives in Charles City today saw it coming the way it actually came.
This is the story of Oliver Farm Equipment Company. Not its founding myth alone, but the slower, stranger ending. How a truck manufacturer from Cleveland, Ohio, came to own one of the most respected names in American agriculture, and how respect turned out not to be enough to save it. The plow before the tractor. Oliver's story does not begin with a tractor. It begins with a plow, and with a man who almost didn't survive the trip to make one. James Oliver was born in Scotland in 1823 and emigrated with his family to Indiana as a boy. By the 1850s, he was running a foundry in South Bend on the St. Joseph River, and like every foundryman in the Midwest at the time, he was chasing the same problem every farmer west of Ohio was chasing. The prairie soil clung to cast iron plowshares the way wet clay clings to a boot, and a plow that didn't scour clean behind it was a plow that doubled a man's labor. Oliver's solution, patented in 1868, was a chilled casting process that hardened the iron surface unevenly, leaving it harder and smoother than anything else on the market. The chilled plow scoured cleanly in the gummy soils of the Midwest in a way competitors' plows simply could not. And Oliver Chilled Plow Works, founded formally in South Bend in 1869, grew from a single foundry into one of the most trusted names a Midwestern farmer could put on his implement shed. For 60 years, Oliver made plows, not tractors. The leap into the tractor business came in 1929, in a merger that is easy to state and hard to overstate. Oliver Chilled Plow Works combined with Hart Parr Company of Charles City, Iowa, the firm whose engineers are credited with coining the word tractor itself in 1907, along with American Seeding Machine Company and Nichols and Shepard, to form Oliver Farm Equipment Company. Charles City became the tractor manufacturing heart of the new company. South Bend remained the historic seat of the Oliver name. The merger gave Oliver something almost no competitor had: a full line, from tillage to seeding to harvest to horsepower, under one name, at the exact moment the American tractor market was about to become the defining battlefield of Midwest agriculture. What came out of Charles City over the next 2 decades was not just equipment. It was the moment a regional plowmaker became a national tractor brand, and the decision that followed it, decades later, would arrive exactly as so many implement dealers in the Corn Belt had quietly feared. Meadow green on every section line. By the mid-1930s, Oliver tractors carried a color scheme that became, like International Harvester's red or Alice Chalmers' Persian orange, a kind of rural shorthand. Oliver's meadow green, paired with a contrasting cream or clover white trim, depending on the era, was distinctive enough that a neighbor driving past a farmstead could identify the operation's loyalty from the road without reading a single decal. "He runs green" meant something specific in Iowa, Indiana, Minnesota, and the Dakotas. It meant a farmer who valued the row crop visibility Oliver's tricycle front design gave him, who trusted the company's 6-cylinder engineering, and who, more often than not, had inherited that loyalty from a father who'd run Hart Parr machines before the merger. The color was never just decoration. Meadow green was how Oliver told a farmer, from across a section line, that this operation belonged to the family of Green Farms, and for nearly 50 years, that family kept growing. The Golden Model. If there is one tractor that represents Oliver at its absolute peak, Agricultural historians and collectors point to the same machine almost without exception, the Oliver 88, produced from 1947 through 1954, with the related Super 88 carrying the line forward into 1958. The 88 arrived with a six-cylinder engine, producing roughly 42 to 48 horsepower at the drawbar, depending on configuration and fuel. Gasoline, diesel, and LP gas versions were all offered, an unusual breadth for the era, and it sold new for a little under $2,000 in its early production years, a serious but attainable investment for a mid-sized Midwest farm operation moving away from horses for good.
What made the 88 beloved wasn't the spec sheet, though. Oral histories collected by tractor show organizers and printed in collector publications like Belt Pulley magazine over the years describe the 88 in strikingly consistent terms. Farmers recall it as smooth running for its class, easy to start in cold weather thanks to its six-cylinder balance, and repeatedly quiet for what it was, a detail that mattered enormously to a man who spent 12 hours a day in the seat. A well-kept Oliver 88 today routinely brings $3,000 to $8,000 at auction, depending on condition and configuration, with restored Super 88 diesel models occasionally climbing higher among collectors chasing a complete set.
This was the tractor a generation of Midwest farmers grew up believing would never not exist. The pressure builds. There is a filing in U.S. corporate merger records from 1960 that shows precisely when Oliver Farm Equipment Company stopped being independent. The date most people assume, sometime in the chaos of the 1980s farm crisis, is wrong by 2 full decades. Oliver was acquired in 1960 by the White Motor Corporation, a Cleveland, Ohio truck and engine manufacturer that had spent the prior several years assembling a farm equipment portfolio almost the way a collector assembles a set. White went on, within a few years, to also acquire Cockshut Farm Equipment of Canada and the Minneapolis Moline Company, folding all 3 storied independent brands under one industrial holding structure. For a few years in the 1960s, Oliver, Cockshut, and Minneapolis Moline continued to be built and badged under their own historic names, even sharing engineering platforms behind the scenes, a fact that dealers in all 3 networks suspected long before White confirmed it. It would be the 1980s farm crisis, not the 1960 acquisition, that delivered the final blow. But the acquisition is what made the brand vulnerable to begin with. Between 1981 and 1986, an estimated 300,000 or more American farms went through foreclosure or forced liquidation as commodity prices collapsed and interest rates, which had peaked above 20% at the start of the decade, made carrying farm debt impossible for thousands of operations that had expanded through the 1970s on borrowed money. Equipment dealers across Iowa, Indiana, and Minnesota, the heart of Oliver country, watched order books that had been full in 1979 sit nearly empty by 1983. A manufacturer already operating under a parent company with its own truck business troubles had almost no cushion left to absorb a crisis of that scale. White Motor Corporation itself filed for bankruptcy in 1980, restructuring its farm equipment holdings into a new entity, White Farm Equipment Company, in an attempt to keep the agricultural side alive, separate from the failing truck business. It didn't fully work. The Oliver name, already fading on new equipment through the late 1970s as White consolidated model lines under the White Farm Equipment badge, effectively disappeared from new production by the early 1980s. The Charles City plant that had built tractors continuously since the Hart Parr days limped through various ownership changes. White Farm Equipment, then a 1985 sale of assets to Allied Products Corporation, which kept a much smaller operation running under the name White New Idea for a time, before that too wound down. Records of the final equipment liquidations out of the Charles City and related plants describe rooms full of machine tools, tooling that had shaped sheet metal and cast iron continuously since before the Depression, sold off in sessions that, by multiple second-hand accounts from those who attended, ran for hours and drew unusually subdued crowds for an industrial auction. Equipment that had helped build tens of thousands of tractors went for scrap-adjacent prices. People who'd worked the line, or whose fathers had, came to watch more than to bid. Charles City, Iowa sits along the Cedar River in Floyd County, with a population that has drifted down from its mid-century peak of roughly 9,000 residents toward figures closer to 7,500 in recent decades. Not a collapse on the scale of some single-industry steel or auto towns, but a steady, multi-decade erosion that locals will tell you tracks almost exactly with the tractor plant's decline. Portions of the historic Hart Parr/Oliver manufacturing complex have been repurposed over the years for smaller industrial tenants and storage use. Other sections sat vacant for long stretches before redevelopment efforts took hold. The Charles City Area Historical Society and a dedicated local museum now hold much of what survives of the company's records and early machines. A town's institutional memory, doing the work a factory floor used to do simply by existing.
What lives in the sheds now? Unlike a defunct car brand or a discontinued stereo line, Oliver tractors did not vanish from daily life when the company did. Somewhere tonight in a machine shed in north-central Iowa or southern Minnesota, an Oliver 77 or 88 is getting its points and condenser checked ahead of fall fieldwork or a county antique power show by someone who learned the carburetor adjustments from a father or grandfather who bought the machine new. The Oliver Collectors News and a network of regional chapters, alongside dedicated Oliver and Hart Parr sections at major antique tractor shows like the Midwest Old Threshers Reunion in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, keep a remarkably active community running. These are not museum pieces under glass. Many of these tractors still pull a disc, run a baler, or simply parade at the county fair every single year, maintained by people who consider that maintenance a form of remembrance. The knowledge of how to time a magneto on a 6-cylinder Oliver or how to bleed the fuel system on a diesel Super 88 no longer lives in any corporate service manual that a phone call can summon. It lives in people, and in the machines themselves, which, despite everything that happened to the company that built them, have simply refused to stop running.
What actually disappeared? The meadow green that once marked a farm's loyalty from the road did not vanish because White Motor bought a tractor company in 1960, and it did not vanish because the farm crisis broke equipment order books 2 decades later. Those were the mechanisms. What actually happened is that the kind of mid-sized, diversified family farm operation that needed a 45-horsepower row crop tractor and trusted a single full-line manufacturer to outfit it from plow to combine. That operation, as a common way of organizing Midwest agricultural life, became rarer with almost every year that passed after 1980. The farms that survived consolidated, scaled up, and needed equipment that Oliver, as an independent company, was never positioned to keep building. The machine and the way of life it served went down together. The factory closing was the obituary's dateline. The disappearance of the farm it served was the obituary itself.
If you grew up on a green tractor, or if your father did, and told you what meadow green meant on a Sunday drive past the neighbor's place, the next story in this series is one you'll want to hear.